If we set aside bandits, military and mercenaries for obvious reason, we are left with freedom, duty, clear sky, monolith, and the ecologists. It is also worth noting that while the latter may have been envisioned as a faction in the initial documents, they certainly are not in the final product. Much like the loners, they are a faction in name only, but in reality, they are a scattered network of researchers connected through scientific work. This makes them highly relevant to the question of the noosphere, but for now we can leave them aside. Likewise, for the purposes of this analysis, there is no need to delve deeply into the narrative surrounding individual factions. Instead, we can focus solely on the essence. The two strongest factions among stalkers who maintain control over their own thoughts are duty and freedom. They represent polar opposites, embodying fundamentally different approaches to intervention. In this regard, duty believes that radical intervention is necessary to suppress the zone, eliminate its anomalies and the creatures it spawns, and ultimately destroy the zone itself. The zone is a manifestation of evil that threatens to consume humanity, and therefore it is the sacred duty of every member of this faction to prevent such a development. They are organized in a militaristic manner, armed to the teeth and equipped with top-tier protection, perfectly aligned with the core of their narrative: authority, discipline, and security. Their members thus find meaning in a grand cause and the conviction that they are doing the right thing, seeing themselves as a bulwark separating the weak from the forces of evil.
Нет, все равно. Пока зону не сделаем, не уйдем отсюда. Права у нас такого нет. Не дай бог в мир такое выползет. Черт, мы ведь какие уроды. Свобода всем даром. Какая тут свобода? Выпустить твари за периметр. Сами шизанутые, так в сторонку отойдите, не мешайте работать.
Of course, their goal remains highly abstract, and at no point do we learn what exactly it means to destroy the zone or how this is to be achieved. On the opposite side, we find freedom, a faction that views intervention negatively as a violation through which human malice would disrupt the virgin landscapes of the zone, allegedly filled with various blessings that could benefit humanity. Among the ranks of this clan are a diverse group of individuals who share the belief that freedom from coercion, the kind that defines the human world they fled, can be found in this new environment. Thus, the zone represents potential both in terms of the anomalies it generates and in terms of individual liberation and the opportunity to indulge in bodily pleasures unrestrained or to construct one's life according to one's own standards.
Эти-то из долга. Так запарились, что уже совсем. Сами по-человечески не живете, ну и хрен с вами. Дайте другим, хоть не мешайте. Фанатики хреновые. Что в городе по-людски жить не давали, что тут началось. Долг этот долбаный. Вояки скоты. Нет, чтобы оставить зону в покое. Все им надо под себя подмять. Все, блин, под контроль. Уроды.
Of course, as already mentioned, human malice, prejudice, weakness, and treachery have long since shaped and filled the zone, and the members of this faction cannot wash their hands of responsibility. The relationship between these two factions is particularly interesting because the core ideals they uphold, security and freedom, are two fundamental elements whose balance is frequently debated in our own reality. It is clear that both are of immense importance for survival, but it is equally evident that the expansion of one, at least as far as we know, can only come at the expense of the other. These are also two ideals, or rather two concepts, in the pursuit of which meaning is found. This phenomenon actually represents the second station on the path of cognition. Physical manifestations, limited and disappointingly natural, are replaced by abstractions that, due to their vastness, allow for a wide range of interpretations and forms of identification. They also serve as an ode to our cognitive capacities, which enable us to self-indulgently contemplate the seemingly boundless realm of imagination and ingenuity intended for us and our species to conquer. Meaning is imagined. However, when abstraction gives way to action, as mentioned, we come to realize that these pure forms easily collapse into the mud and that we are not as magnificent as we may have initially believed. On the other hand, the earlier mentioned expansion tied to these ideals is also reflected in the territorial expansion of their adherents. Thus, despite being driven by grand words, factions remain bound to physical space, often in conflict with one another. A faction is in reality a pack, augmented by the uniquely human ability for abstract reasoning. The survival, expansion, and evolution of life through the action of these clans become the survival, expansion, and evolution of ideas. The conflict then stems from the fact that it is impossible to determine an objective priority among ideals, because if they symbolize our uniqueness, then only we can establish a hierarchy among them. This brings us back to the same point made earlier with the monkeys and the monolith. Information flows from us toward these abstractions, which is to say that the meaning and purpose are assigned, not extracted. Again, we construct the path ourselves, we do not discover it. This makes it clear that the content hidden behind terms like security and freedom varies from person to person. Thus, divisions are to be expected not only between advocates of different ideals, but also within those very factions. However, as abstractions, these ideals exist like guiding stars, giving meaning to actions and casting at least some light into the black void of the cosmos. Yet, their very abstractness, their distance, can never bring fulfillment. No matter how persistently we walk toward a star, we can never reach it. On the contrary, we'll just end up right back where we started. Likewise, no matter how enchanting its light may be, it will never warm us. The most it can do is momentarily gladden the soul, ignite the imagination, and stir longing. A glance at campfire conversation reveals everything, for NPCs do not hide their thoughts and emotion. This gives us insights into the deep dissonance between factional narratives and the realities that living by these standards actually produce. The Duty faction, champions of heroism, resilience, and brotherhood, reveal their weakness, exhaustion, and drowsiness.
Однако дерьмово ситуевина складывается. Сколько уже тут паримся, а подмоги почти никакой. Ай, сколько тут еще дряни всякой. Чистить и чистить. Ну и ухайдокался я в полный ноль. А раскисать пока нельзя. Ох, нельзя. А группа моя... Никого уже. Никого. Что, защитник человечества? Спать хочешь? Нельзя, нельзя. Люди надеются на тебя. Как же надеются? Нифига они про нас не знают. Да и хрен с ней, со Славой. Разобраться бы с этой зоной.
Their members, scattered across the zone on missions, remain alone, without support from headquarters. Those who manage to return bring with them the bitterness of guilt and sorrow for friends who have vanished forever. The order and strength depicted on propaganda posters give way to the chaos and fatigue of reality, and their warriors, despised and aware that no one outside the zone even knows they exist, are deprived of any joy in life. And what happens in the opposite camp? The members of freedom, champions of liberty, choice, and potential, discover that their existence boils down to bodily pleasures of which there is never enough.
А у меня вот ни косяка не осталось. И фиг его знает, где сейчас достать. Ух, сейчас бы толковый сейшн сбацать. До центров хорошо напустить, чтобы всех вставило. Эх, пивасика бы что ли, да с амульком. С хорошим таким мясистым амульком. Блин, ну какой из него командир? Фуфло. А из кожи лезет. Все бы ему командовать. Ну и какого хрена тут торчишь, а, спрашивается? Дуй на фирму какую-нибудь менеджером. Или в войско на контракт. О, точно. Там ему самое место.
When reflecting on their current state, they speak of smoking weed, of beer in their stomachs and needles in their veins. They dream of the sea, of hangovers and intoxication, of everything that is not here and now, everything that is not the so-called land of possibilities or the zone from the rhetoric. The imagined freedom and potential transform into addiction and idleness in reality, and their warriors, indifferent, drugged, and inevitably reliant on a command structure, pave the way for evil to spread. The supposed liberation from the military and from duty turns into enslavement to opiates and commanders, while the talk of opportunities serves merely as a facade for despair. Finally, we come to Clear Sky, the third among the free-minded stalker factions, which represents an active group whose existence is not reduced to looting, mercenary work, or state-driven motives. This faction was introduced in the second part of the original trilogy as an equivalent of the initially conceived ecologists, not merely a network of scientists, but a true clan led by experienced researchers. Naturally, Clear Sky plays a key role in this installment of the game and represents a particularly intriguing team, as they seem to be the only ones with a rough understanding of what truly lies behind the zone. Both their leader, N.A. Lebedev, and the prominent scientist E.F. Kalancha, mistakenly renamed to Bin Polev in the English localization, point out to the protagonist Scar from the very start that the world they find themselves in is the result of human activity. However, if we listen to other members of the faction, we discover that most of them have no real idea of what is actually going on. Quite the opposite. Their comments revolve around the belief that their leaders possess knowledge and therefore a plan, meaning there is no need to overthink things, only to listen and obey. Based on the comments and conversations of NPCs gathered around campfires, we can see more or less clearly that meaning is found in the belief that the learned men have a plan. No matter how complicated a zone may seem or how tedious and inexplicable the orders from superiors might be, there is a conviction that behind it all lies a clear understanding of the order of things and that all the pieces of the puzzle will eventually fall into place.
А я все равно не понимаю, как оно все в зоне устроено. Начальство умное, все разобраться пытается. А мое дело маленькое, с автоматом по болотам бегать. И я так понимаю, раз начальство там что-то исследует, то должна быть какая-то конкретная цель. Смысл. Лично я особо над смыслом не задумываюсь. Есть поставленная задача, за выполнение платят нормально, вот тебе и смысл с мотивацией. Спору нет, начальству виднее. А все же хочется иногда узнать, ради чего мы все это. Да, тут крути, не крути, маракуй, не маракуй, а все равно выйдет так, как командиры скажут. Ну или как зона решит.
However, for a group that prides itself on scientific pursuit, such blind faith in leadership seems dubious. Contrary to the principles of inquiry, the majority of its members follow orders blindly rather than seeking to discover and question. Just like with duty or freedom, there is a significant gap between the faction's narrative and its actual content. Yet, this discrepancy is not surprising when we consider the origins of Clear Sky. While interactions with the aforementioned scientists give the impression that they arrived at their conclusions about the zone's origins through research, one of the missions in Call of Pripyat reveals something entirely different. During an expedition to Laboratory X8, the protagonist, Major Dektyarev, comes across an order for the transfer of equipment, materials, and research team to Laboratory X7. The document reveals that the researchers in question are N.A. Lebedev, E.F. Kalancha, and V.I. Suslov. The first two are already familiar from the previous discussion, while the latter turns out to be Docent Suslov, a trader whom we also meet at the very beginning of Clear Sky. In other words, these individuals are members of the group, a secret organization of researchers formed within the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the very same group that tampered with a noosphere and triggered an ecological catastrophe. Thus, it turns out that Clear Sky is not an organized clan of scientists, but rather that the aforementioned trio, along with a few other members, engage in research while the rest are there for work and profit, contrary to what Lebedev tells Scar. This very structure, with its centralization of knowledge and decision-making, ultimately leads to the faction's downfall once its leadership is eliminated. A rigid hierarchical order means that striking or neutralizing key nodes in the network results in the collapse of the whole. The same applies to errors. Disaster does not come out of nowhere, but rather as a consequence of misguided expectations, such as the belief that eliminating Strelok would put an end to the emissions. The leadership's miscalculation ultimately costs the entire community. This fate is directly tied to the logic of how their former associates from C consciousness were structured, a point we will return to later. For now, let us note the following. The curse of alienation and disorientation follows us like a shadow. We have seen this in our reflection on the novel, in our analysis of individual stalkers in the game, and in the film as well. It is one of the central themes associated with the vast expanses of the zone regardless of the medium in which it is explored. In their desire to escape from it and avoid the dull stares in the metro, stalkers expose themselves to all kinds of dangers. And yet, even these seemingly untouched landscapes offer no real solace.
Ох, неохота мне за хабаром сегодня плестись. Сейчас бы дома оказаться, в гамачке да с книжкой толковой. Пожрать бы чего хорошего. Так ведь нету. А колбасу и батоны нынче хреновые делать стали. Концентраты, сплошные. А дома-то как было? Придешь вечером, а баба домашнего на стол, горячего, ах.
They long for family, a good book, and home. Some seek refuge in a group that offers purpose and belief. However, metaphorical merging with the collective body may silence the soul's cry for a time, but soon disillusionment sets in, or the idealized image of unity gets shattered in some other way, and the same problems return with equal or even greater intensity.